Good evening. This is Rachel Blomquist, librarian at the Putnam County Public Library. Welcome to tonight's program, Dixon Waterfowl Refuge, a Hidden Natural Treasure. Before we begin, just a few reminders. On Tuesday, November 19th at 6 p.m. Central, the library will virtually host Bruce Treadway from the National Museum of the American Sailor for a presentation on naval aviation history at the Naval Station Great Lakes. On Tuesday, December 3rd at 6 p.m. Central, the library will virtually host James Jill Napper, NASA Solar System Ambassador, for a presentation on how holidays are celebrated in space. And on Tuesday, December 10th at 6 p.m. Central, the library will virtually host Father Dominic, aka the Bread Monk, for a presentation on holiday baking. All library programming is free and open to the public. It is also shareable, so please feel free to pass the information on to others. And now tonight, let's welcome Katie Cusera and Justin Seibert. Katie?
Thanks, Rachel. I'll start sharing my screen in just a second. One moment. Okay, how does this look?
Looks good.
Great. First, thank you for having us. Thank you to the Putnam County Public Library for hosting us again tonight. I know we've presented a similar program in the past, so it's good to be back to share about the good work that we do at the Sioux and West Dixon Waterfowl Refuge at Hennepin and Hopper Lakes. Quick introduction, my name is Katie Cusera. I'm an ecologist with the Wetlands Initiative. Justin, I don't know if you want to jump in right now, but Justin will be presenting after me. Justin is the site manager for the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge. So some quick background on the Wetlands Initiative. We are a nonprofit based in Chicago. We work in Northeast Illinois, North and Central Illinois, and Northwest Indiana to restore wetlands and the landscapes of which wetlands are a part. Our vision is a world with plentiful, healthy wetlands, improving water quality, climate, biodiversity, and human well-being. In addition to our work at the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge, we also work in the Calumet region in Northwest Indiana and Northeast Illinois. We have a smart wetlands program that works with farmers and municipalities across the state to install tile treatment wetlands. And we work with the U.S. Forest Service and other partners at Medewin National Tallgrass Prairie in Wilmington, Illinois. Before we get into our work at the refuge, I wanted to give some brief background on wetland ecology in Illinois and provide some information on why we do wetland restoration. So let's start by defining what a wetland is. Wetlands are areas that are inundated or saturated by surface or groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and that under normal circumstances do support, a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. Wetlands are lands that are transitional between terrestrial and aquatic systems, where the water table is usually at or near the surface, or the land is covered by shallow water. Wetlands originally made up a lot more of the flat Midwest landscape than most people today realize. A healthy prairie landscape is not separate from wetlands, but rather is threaded with and needs wetlands of many types and sizes. The flat Midwest is quite rich in rivers and streams, which originally were slower, more connected with their wide floodplains, and more prone to shifting around. Prior to the 19th century, between a quarter and a third of the vast tallgrass prairie region was wetlands. Many of the wetlands that we have in Illinois were the result of glaciation. Our large water bodies, rivers, and wetland ecosystems were formed by the actions of glaciers as they moved across the landscape, receded, and melted. As glaciers receded and large chunks of ice melted, rivers, isolated lakes, and wetlands formed. Many large wetland complexes today exist in close proximity to river systems. Floodplain wetlands and oxbow marshes are common wetland systems along large rivers, as is the case for the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge and the Illinois River. To dig a little deeper into our local wetlands and wetland history, let's look at the state of Illinois. A large portion of land in Illinois is composed of hydric soil or wetland soils that are wet enough for a long enough period of time to be considered hydric. The quotes on the right are from the Illinois Wildlife Action Plan, which describes the habitat types in each of the natural divisions in the state. As you can see, even in what we know as the Grand Prairie Natural Division, which occupies a good portion of the state, there's a significant concentration of wetland soils, and the description from the Illinois Wildlife Action Plan actually states that some marshes and wetlands exist due to poor natural drainage of soils. Unfortunately, Illinois has lost a majority of its wetland cover over the past 200 years. Between 1780 and 1980, people in Illinois drained nearly 7 million acres of wetlands. Wetlands used to occupy 23% of the land cover in Illinois and now occupy only 3.5%. Along with other states in the Midwest Corn Belt, Illinois has lost between 80 to 90% of our wetlands. Wetlands were primarily destroyed through the installation of drain tile for agriculture. So people would dig a ditch down to the water table and install tiles that would carry water away from the soil surface. Over 10 million acres in Illinois are tile drained, which is more than a quarter of all of the land in the state. Fortunately, wetland restoration can be pretty straightforward at the beginning because an easy way to restore wetland hydrology is to remove drain tile. Removing drain tile systems can restore hydrology to wetlands very quickly, and with the right management in place, which I'll discuss in a moment, native plant communities can quickly reestablish. And this is one of the main ways we started to bring wetlands back to the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge. Quickly, before getting into further details about restoration, I'll quickly review some of the benefits that wetlands offer. Wetlands are the most productive type of ecosystem outside of the tropics. They provide food during critical migration and breeding periods for many species of birds and other animals. And 1/3 of all threatened and endangered animal and plant species occur in wetlands. Here are a handful of the many thousands of plants, birds, amphibians, fish, insects, and other animals that depend on wetlands for their survival. And these are just some of the amazing creatures that you can see at the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge. In addition to supporting high levels of biodiversity, wetlands have many benefits to people and society. A primary benefit is that wetlands, either left intact or when they're restored, can help reduce flooding, which is becoming an increasing problem. Wetlands provide vegetated areas where floodwaters can be intercepted, slowed down, stored, and gradually released back to rivers and streams. Deep-rooted vegetation helps dissipate the flow of energy from rushing water, slows the velocity, and promotes infiltration of water back into the soil instead of running off. Wetlands are also critical for improving water quality, especially wetlands that have plants. As plants grow, senesce, and decompose, a cycle plays out wherein nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus are gradually used by the plants in the wetland, and that results in denitrification. As the plants decompose, carbon and nitrogen are also stored and fixed by microbes that live in wetland systems. These processes require different biotic and abiotic components of wetlands, but over time, nutrients and pollutants are removed from the water in which the wetland plants are growing, and this also helps settle sediments out of the water column, which improves water quality. Another benefit is that wetlands contribute to groundwater recharge. When the correct features are present on the landscape, freshwater wetlands can help move water directly to groundwater sources, including aquifers. Lastly, wetlands are also enormous carbon sinks, meaning that they store more carbon per unit area than any other ecosystem. In particular, coastal wetlands store 10 times more carbon than terrestrial forests, but generally speaking, much of the carbon stored in wetlands is in wetland soils, and it can also be stored in woody biomass. Yeah. Now let's talk about restoration at the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge. So the story of the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge begins with the Illinois River. In the early 1900s, the Illinois River was one of North America's most ecologically and economically significant river systems. It supported the most productive inland commercial fishery and the highest mussel abundance per mile of any stream on the continent. Even though it has undergone significant land conversion during the past century, the river was identified as one of 3 large floodplain river ecosystem restoration priorities in the United States. For more context, the refuge, as you know, is located in Hennepin in an area called the Big Bend region, where the Illinois River makes a turn and starts flowing in a more southerly direction. This area historically had many backwater wetlands and marshes and had a high diversity of fish, mussels, and wetland plant species. In the 1930s, dams were constructed along the full length of the 333-mile-long river to maintain a 9-foot depth navigable channel. This, of course, resulted in increased industry along the river, which caused pollution, siltation, and overharvesting of aquatic organisms. So many of the formerly rich backwater marshes were either flooded or filled in with silt, and a lot of the fisheries crashed. Around 1996, the original founders of the Wetlands Initiative came to learn of a floodplain that was being farmed in Hennepin. Farming was made possible here by the Hennepin Drainage and Levee District, which had installed levees, ditches, drain tiles, and a drainage pump, which made it possible to farm in the river floodplain without the risk of the river flooding. When the price of corn dropped and the original farmers couldn't break a profit farming the floodplain and paying to run the pump, which was very expensive, they gradually turned the land over to the Wetlands Initiative. After acquiring the agricultural parcels, the Wetlands Initiative began restoration of the almost 3,000-acre site. In 2001, we turned off the pump and disabled the drain tiles, and within a few months, springs, seeps, and rainfall refilled the lake beds, and many native species of plants and animals started to return to the lakes. Today, the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge is a 3,100-acre landscape and growing mosaic of 22 different habitat types. So, what guides our restoration goals and management of the site today? At the refuge, we are motivated primarily by these 3 main restoration goals. The first is scale. We want to demonstrate that large-scale floodplain wetland restoration is possible, and we want to develop a large mosaic of integrated habitats across the landscape. Our second goal is diversity. We aim to restore high levels of biological diversity and to demonstrate that biologically diverse wetlands help support migratory waterfowl. Our last goal is function. We want to restore functional wetland ecosystems for wildlife habitat, water quality, and nutrient dynamics. To accomplish these restoration goals, we've had to use a number of resources to figure out what the landscape used to look like before it was farmed, and also figure out how to work within this new system where we're separated from the river and we use a pump and we have to manage levees. To guide our restoration strategy early on, we used aerial photos and historical maps. We also looked at land ownership and easement documents. We also looked at soil and hydrology maps, along with elevation and drainage maps. And we studied plant communities from the past and present and used reference habitats to figure out what we needed to bring back to the landscape. The most important aspect of our restoration work relies on maintaining an appropriate hydrologic cycle and keeping water levels stable. At the refuge, we mainly do this through the use of our pump. Like I've mentioned, the refuge itself is separated from the Illinois River by levees, so water levels at the refuge are not dependent on the river. Another good thing about the levee system is that it provides protection from silt deposition, flooding, water quality issues, and invasive species. Speaking of invasive species, a majority of the work that the refuge crew does on a daily basis involves managing species that have been introduced to Illinois. These species did not co-evolve with our indigenous ecosystems, and they are highly competitive. So we spend a lot of time keeping them in check, which Justin will talk more about shortly. We are very vigilant about invasive species spreading at the refuge and especially spreading into newly restored areas. Some of the more aggressive introduced species that we deal with at the refuge include Phragmites, which is also called common reed, which is a very tall growing and aggressively spreading grass. We also treat a lot of hybrid cattail stands. We have reed canary grass in many places across the refuge. And we also deal with other plants such as multiflora rose and purple loosestrife. One of the main animal invaders at the refuge is common carp. In fact, it is perhaps the most impactful thing that we've done to restore the refuge has been to treat the carp in the lake system. In 2 rounds of treatment between 2008 and 2012, we applied a pesticide called rotenone to kill invasive carp and to restore an abundance of native fish. While we didn't expect this treatment to last forever because carp are very stealthy and get around easily, we are still enjoying the fruits of our labor a decade later, and there are great fishing opportunities at Hennepin Hopper. To restore such large areas, we have relied heavily on the use of native seeds. Early on in the restoration process, we purchased over $250,000 of seed, and we spread that seed across multiple different habitat types at the refuge. We're now at a point where we can collect a significant amount of our own seeds on site. However, we still work with native seed vendors across the region to source hard to find and locally adapted seeds to supplement our restorations and increase species diversity. To support the native plant communities at the refuge and also as a method of controlling invasive species, we also conduct prescribed burns. This process is critical for recycling nutrients back to the soil and promoting plant diversity and regeneration. At the right time, a prescribed burn can knock back invasive species and promote the growth of native fire-adapted species. Most of the parcels that we burn at the refuge are on a 3-year burn rotation because it's also important to us to leave some habitat intact over the winter, and that intact habitat acts as a refuge for small animals that are overwintering and also insects and pollinators. After managing invasives and burning certain areas, the next step in our restoration process is to put down native seed mixes. We prefer to seed on light snow cover or seeding right before a heavy snowstorm whenever possible. And we also prefer to seed in areas that have been burned. This timeline is really important to make sure that seeds have good contact with the soil when we put them down, and also helps make sure that seeds have enough time to stratify over the winter. Seed stratification is a process that a seed goes through to break dormancy and germinate, and it usually requires the seed to be exposed to cold temperatures and moisture. So snow is perfect for that. Some seeds, however, do not stratify or germinate easily, or when they do germinate, they take years to grow into mature flowering plants. So another restoration tactic that we use is to supplement our restorations with native plant plugs. This is a bit more expensive than buying and collecting native seeds, but it's a great way to get people out to the refuge to help out and to invite people to visit in the springtime when everything is green and lush and waking up after the winter ends. To track our restoration progress, we do a lot of habitat monitoring at the refuge. So here are some brief statistics about the plant community development at the refuge. Since we have started restoration, we have identified a total of 824 plant species at the refuge. 735 of those plants are native species, which is about 89%. 176 of those are obligate wetland species. 97% are facultative wetland species. And we also have 18 threatened and endangered plant species, including one, which is a obligate wetland species, and Justin will talk a little bit more about those. As a result of all of the work that we put into restoring the refuge was recognized as a wetland of international importance. In 2012, the Dixon Refuge, like I said, was recognized as a wetland of international importance under the Ramsar Convention. The Ramsar Convention was an international treaty signed in Ramsar, Iran in 1971 to promote worldwide wetland conservation. The Dixon Waterfowl Refuge at Hennepin Hopper is one of only 41 sites in the United States to have received this distinction. And we had to meet certain criteria based on rare or unique wetland types to meet this qualification and to get this recognition. Some of these criteria include that the refuge contains rare and unique wetland types. This is a photo of the door seep. Another criteria is that the refuge supports endangered species and threatened ecological communities. The refuge also helps maintain the biodiversity of the region. It also provides habitat and refuge for animal species at critical stages in their life cycles. It also regularly supports more than 20,000 water birds during migration, which Justin will talk more about as well. And lastly, it supports significant numbers of both common and rare native fish. And I'm going to leave this up to Justin as well. And that's all I have. So I'm going to pass it to Justin.
Thanks, Katie. So my name's Justin Seibert. I'm the site manager at the Sioux and West Dixon Waterfowl Refuge. Just wanted to give a little bit of background on myself. I actually grew up about 100 yards from where the refuge boundary is now. I got to see the area when it was crop fields, and I feel very lucky that I got to see the process of the restoration Katie was just talking about, and also was involved with planting some of the very first plugs at the refuge. So to talk about a new restoration project we got going on at the refuge. If you look at this map here, this is the southern edge of the refuge, and we just purchased a property earlier this year. It consists of 40 acres, 35 acres of it tillable and 5 acres of timber. Some of the stuff we've been doing on it recently, if you look at the middle picture here, you can see railroad ties put in his fence posts. And the person that owned the property before had about 600 railroad ties laying around the property, anywhere from 8 to 14 foot long. He had piles hidden in the woods, so we rented an excavator to remove all these, and all these railroad ties were recycled. There was also a lot of just junk laying around on the property, such as old plows, old cedars, old harrows, gas cans. And with some help from some local volunteers, we were able to get this stuff removed. And as you can see, some of that stuff has been sitting there for a long time. So here is an aerial view of Sandy Knob, the new property we purchased. To orient you to the slide, this is Highway 26. This road right here is the road that takes you to Sandy Hollow, and the parking lot is back here. And if you look in the background here, this is the lake at the refuge. Some of the other stuff we did at the site, we removed a bunch of undesirable trees and shrubs along this fence line with the use of some contractors. We kept some of the really nice trees, like some of these really big hackberry trees, some Ohio buckeyes, walnut trees, some smaller oak trees, and some wafer ash along here. And throughout the border runs about here, and it runs like this. Throughout the border had fence posts, old barbed wire that we removed. There was a lot of shrubs along the highway here. There was actually a really old power line that was not working anymore, but that was a real eyesore that we were able to get removed. And currently, it was farmed in beans this year. The beans have been harvested, and we plan on seeding it later this fall. And a big reason why we purchased this property was to protect the door seep. And the door seep's kind of located over here. And to give you an idea of the area, a lot of these farm fields and area up here is very sandy, porous soils. So a lot of runoff runs right down into the door seep. And the door seep's one of our remnant sites on the refuge, and it's also an Illinois nature preserve. So it's in a very important area to protect. Another reason is it's very visible from the highway. It's going to allow people to see some of the restoration efforts that we're conducting. Some of the main invasive species we treat at the refuge, there is a running theme with these invasive species. Canadian thistle is one of them. If you look at this picture, you can tell how dense these invasive species grow. And the native species in the area haven't adapted to use these as habitat, and they also shade out other native plants. Another one's reed canary. If you could see, it's very, very dense. Same thing, very poor habitat. Phragmites is another one. Same thing, very dense, shades out other native species and provides very little habitat for wildlife. If you take a ride on Interstate 80, you'll see a lot of it along the roadside ditches. It likes very disturbed areas. So here's a treatment map. This is some of the work we've done this year. On this map, the green line here is the boundaries. The yellow dots are areas we treated Phragmites. And if you notice, a lot of the areas where the Phragmites were treated were along the lake shore. And this was most of these areas were in areas that were very hard to get equipment we had. So this is some of the first times we've been treating some of these areas. Thankfully, somebody donated a Marshmaster to us more recently, and it's been a game changer in getting to these spots. So the narrow leaf and hybrid cattail is another one, same thing, very dense, tend to monoculturalize and shade out other species. One of the main areas we've been working on cattail treatment is within the door seep. If you see these yellow polygons, this is actually the boardwalk that goes through the door seep trail. These yellow polygons are areas we've treated cattails. And since this is an Illinois nature preserve and it's a remnant site that wasn't able to be farmed because of how much water runs through the seep, we have to be very careful, and most of the treatment is done by hand wicking, which basically you just spray chemical on a glove and you treat the individual cattails. Very tedious work, but very gratifying. So here's the Marsh Master I mentioned earlier. It's basically just an amphibious tank. We could pretty much go almost anywhere throughout the refuge, even right through the middle of the lake if we needed to. It contains about 100-gallon sprayer tank on it. And then in the background here, you see this picture. You can see all the hybrid narrowleaf cattails in this area. And you can, if you notice, you don't see any other plants within these areas. And then what looks like a runway that runs through here is actually an area we treated the cattails. And the way we treated that, there's a roller attachment that goes onto the Marsh Master. And it's able, when we have enough water and enough mud, it's able to cut up the cattails and drown them and kill them. But in areas where there's not as much water or mud, it kills the adult cattails. And then if you can see here, you can see some of the resprouts coming out. So in this area, we come back and sprayed those resprouts once they come up. So here's a treatment map of the area I was just talking about. This is Highway 26 that runs along here. It's in an area we call Violet Meadow, which is located near the north end of the refuge. And these yellow polygons are areas we treated with the roller and also some areas we sprayed. This area, our main goals are to create more of a hemi-marsh area and then also to increase biodiversity and create really good habitat for our wildlife species. Before we treated it, it was about 99% cattails and there was pretty much nothing else in there. And it was really awesome. It wasn't very long after we treated this. We were going out there and it was unbelievable the amount of waterfowl, sandhill cranes, different shorebirds, turtles, snakes, and even muskrats that were inhabiting the area we just treated. Another area we've been doing cattail treatments is on the very northern edge of the refuge along the Marquez Oak Ridge Trail. These yellow polygons are areas we've sprayed cattails. This is an area that we restored in the past, but these cattails have been encroaching on our prairies and the areas we've restored. So basically we went in to spray these cattails that push them back and then allow the native species to push back against them. And then also we'll be burning this and seeding it this winter. So why are we treating all these invasive species at the refuge? Well, there's a lot of endangered or threatened and endangered plant species found at the refuge, and I'm just going to talk about a few of them. One of them that sticks out to me is the royal catchfly. It's a very beautiful plant. There actually is quite a bit of royal catchfly at the refuge. This is one of our workers holding fly. Here's another up close picture of the royal catchfly. And you can find this, it's actually located right by the observation tower and then along the Sandy Hollow Trail. Another endangered species at the refuge is the yellow monkey flower. And this species has a very, very specific habitat that it grows in. And it actually grows right in the seep runs that are within the door seep. And that is the main area it grows and thrives. As you walk on the trail, there's a boardwalk that runs through the seep, and some of the seep runs run underneath the boardwalk, and you can see this plant from just off the boardwalk. Some of the mammal species, one of my favorites is the white-tailed deer. We see them pretty much every day out at the refuge, and it's really fun to watch them run around and enjoy this habitat that TWI has created. Another one that sticks out to me is the northern river otter. There's been quite a few sightings of the northern river otter around the boat launch, and that's why we have a northern river otter monument located there. Some amphibian species. One that I've just been dying to see is the eastern hognose snake. There's been a lot of sightings of that along the Sandy Hollow Trail. One of our workers seen one a couple months ago, and I'm just counting down the days till I get to see one myself. A lot of different snakes and turtles. We seen a lot of snapping turtles crossing Highway 26 earlier this spring when they're laying eggs. So make sure you be careful when you're driving. Tons of frogs at the refuge. Tree frogs really stick out to me. Not that long ago, I gave a tour with some Cub Scout kids, and one of the kids seen a tree frog on the observation tower, and all the kids were just blown away with it. And it was really cool to watch the parents tell them, hey, you know, this is the reason why we have the refuge here, so these animals can thrive and they have a place to run freely. Some of the fish species we have at the refuge, one that sticks out to me is the alligator gar. It actually had been extradited from Illinois. With the help with the IDNR, we have been stocking alligator gar into the lake. The red spotted sunfish is a really rare species in Illinois, and we frequently see it in our fish surveys. And two fish that are really helping us are the bowfin and the spotted gar. Some research says that spotted gar actually eat the invasive common carp eggs, and the bowfin eat the young of the year carp. So they've been doing a lot of work for us recently at the lake and helping us keep those common carp back. There's a lot of bird species at the refuge. We have 23 out of the 31 Illinois threatened and endangered species. The barn owl really sticks out. There was confirmed breeding of the endangered barn owl on the refuge, and the yellow-headed blackbird was a really big one. And it was amazing to see how many birds flocked to the refuge after restoration. Some vagrant or rare species observed at the refuge. This is a picture of a black-bellied whistling duck. It's been seen out at the refuge, and it's a very rare bird. If you happen to see it, just feel very lucky. Another one that sticks out is the whooping crane. So to talk about some of the waterfowl migration at the refuge, the Illinois Department of Natural History Survey actually does aerial surveys from late August till early January that gives duck counts at the refuge, and also gives counts for individual species. Some of our early migrants are the blue-winged teal. This is a picture of a blue-winged teal drake. They pretty much come in early September, and then they like the warm weather. They like to get out of here really fast. Another early migrant is the wood duck, and we actually have a lot of breeding pairs of wood ducks out at the refuge. In the summer, we see a lot of babies. Oh, so the early migration, yeah, okay, I already said that. But so they get to the peak migration, which is typically runs from early November to the end of December. And last year, the peak of waterfowl migration was around Thanksgiving, with approximately 40,000 waterfowl on the lake observed through. And that was actually the first week I started, and I got to see this, and it was just breathtaking. And a lot of times the peak migration kind of coincides with a little bit of ice on the lake. At this time, the lake was about 70% frozen. A lot of the peak migrators are the gadwall, making up those numbers. Gadwall seemed to really key in on the refuge, and it's mainly because of the high amounts of sago pondweed out on the lake. They really key in on those specific plants. So mallards actually made up about 20,000, a little over 20,000 of the bird count on that day where we had over 40,000 birds. And on the right here is a canvasback. This is a drake canvasback and a hen canvasback. And they're really cool birds, and they typically migrate through mid-November to middle of December. So plan your trip accordingly. So where's our current waterfowl migration at? Well, currently, based on recent surveys, we have about 2,000 waterfalls sitting on the lake. We have been seeing quite a few birds from the observation tower. One of those that really sticks out from the tower is the northern pintail with the drake on the left and the hen on the right. They actually have a really long pintail and they really stick out, really, really pretty birds. And then another one we've been seeing lately is the northern shoveler. Here's a drake and a hen. And they actually have a bill that is shaped just like a shovel. So the spring migration is a really great time to come out to the refuge. There's a lot of areas that don't have water in the fall that are close to some of our trail systems where you get to see birds that normally aren't there. These two bottom pictures were taken from the observation tower or viewing platform at the end of the Marquez Oak Ridge Trail. And then sandhill cranes. There's a lot of sandhill cranes come through spring migration. They also come through the fall migration, but in the spring, they're very, very loud. They're starting to pair up, getting ready for breeding season. And we also have a lot of sandhill cranes that stay through the summer and breed at the refuge and have young. So where can you go to see these, these amazing different species? We have 4 different access points at the refuge. And I'll start with the north end. Hennepin's just above here. And if you go just south of Hennepin 26, on your right, there's a sign and you take this, you actually drive on the levee and it takes you to a parking lot and it gives you access to the Marquez Oak Ridge Trail. Another access point is located where the observation tower is, just outside of Hennepin Farms, not too far off of 26. And that gives you access to the Prairie Wetland Trail that runs between the tower to the boat ramp. Another access point, it gives you access to the Seep Forest Trail, which takes you down into the Door Seep, and it connects up into the Sandy Hollow Trail system. And lastly, on the southern edge of the refuge, we have a parking lot at Sandy Hollow, just like on that picture I showed you earlier. So to break it down a little bit more, I'm going to talk about the Marquez Oak Ridge Trail. Like I said, you come down 26 just south of Hennepin, you take the levee to the parking lot. And then this trail actually, it takes you through the heart of the refuge and it takes you out to an Oak Ridge savanna. It's about 2.4 miles one way, but it is well worth the hike to get out there. There's a viewing platform located right here. And there's a lot of waterfowl that just love to sit right in front of that viewing platform. These 2 pictures on the bottom here were taken from that viewing platform in the spring. And then out at the Oak Ridge Savanna, there's an absolute giant eagle nest that provides an area for eagles to have their young, and they pretty much have them every year in that nest. And something cool that I was seeing recently is there's been a kingfisher. Every time the crew's been out on the trail, we've seen this kingfisher, and he's been hanging out kind of where these ditches kind of coincide, about halfway down the trail. And I actually took this with my cell phone, so it gives you an idea how close he let me get to him. Here's another picture from the Marquez Oak Ridge Trail. It's actually only about a 1/4 mile from the trailhead. It shows you a lot of the biodiversity we have out there, when I seen this site earlier this year, it literally took my breath away. And it's just amazing to go out there and see the different flowers blooming. These purple flowers back here are the blazing star. The little bit taller ones here are the compass plant. And then you got yellow coneflower, black-eyed Susans, mountain mint. So the Prairie Wetland Trail, like I said, it runs from the observation tower to the boat launch. It's a very short hike. It's only about half a mile. It's a really easy hike. There's a couple boardwalks in between, but it is just amazing because there's so many animals and different plants. The biodiversity in this area is very high. So even though you're on a short hike, you get to see a lot. And then this is a picture of the prairie coneflower, and there's a bumblebee sitting on this one. And then you can see the observation tower in the back. And I actually put this picture on here as a little bit of a teaser because recently we just repainted the tower and put new boards on the tower and put a new viewing scope on the tower. So I didn't want to give you a picture of exactly what it looks like because I would love to see you come out and see it. So the Seep Forest Trail, like I said, it runs south of the boat launch. It's about 1 mile one way, and it takes you into the Dorse Seep, our Illinois Nature Preserve. It's one of the highest, or one of the best areas we have at the refuge. It's a remnant area that wasn't farmed, like I said earlier. And if you can see right here, this is one of the seep runs. And there's a couple seep runs that run just underneath the boardwalk. And you could come out here and you can actually see the yellow monkey flower from the boardwalk. So for the Sandy Hollow Trail, like I said, it's on the southern edge of the refuge. That's just off of 26. There's a big sign right here that says Sandy Hollow. And you take the road down to the trailhead. And you can go 2 different ways from there. One trail takes you through the woods, across the creek, and into the prairie. And then this trail takes you through just a fantastic prairie, across the creek, and then up to the Pavilion, which is a great place to have lunch or a little picnic. And then right there, there's an oak hickory savanna, and it's just amazing. And then this trail actually there's a loop that goes around here, and then there's also 2 connectors that connect you to the Dorsey Trail. One right here, and there's one down here, and you can see the boardwalk right here. So you can actually walk from the Sandy Hollow Trail all the way to the observation tower. Some more pictures, just from the Sandy Hollow Trail. This was the storm coming in at the trailhead. This is the sunset setting and some beautiful flowers blooming. The cool thing about coming out there is if you go out 1 week and you come back 2 weeks later, there's going to be different flowers blooming. So boating on the lake is allowed. We allow people on the lake from May 1st to Labor Day. It's trolling motor only. You're not allowed to have any motorized motors on your boat. You can also use canoes and kayaks. In this picture here, these are a couple trumpeter swans. And these trumpeters have been hanging out there all summer, the whole boating season. They've been living out on the island. And we were just out on the lake recently, and they're still hanging out there. It's a really cool sight to see. And then here's the black netted stilt. It's a really funny bird to observe because their legs are they're like backwards. So when they walk around, it just looks a little goofy, and it's really fun to watch them feed. And then the fishing on the lake is just phenomenal. There's a lot of big largemouth bass to be caught out there. This is a muskie that was caught out in the refuge this year, about 40.5 inches. So how can I be a part of this? Like, this is cool stuff. Like, we have these volunteer events because we want people to be involved. We want people to connect with the area. We had a volunteer plug planting event earlier this May. We focused mainly on planting plugs in the Sandy Hollow area. And then we had 2 volunteer seed collecting days not too long ago. One was in late September and one in early October. And the really cool thing about this is the seed we're collecting at these volunteer days is going to areas like Sandy Knob, and then the areas I talked about where we were treating the cattails and other invasive species. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Oh, and sign up for our e-newsletter if you want to be able to find out when other volunteer events are happening. We have volunteer events every year, and that's a good way to be notified from that.
Okay, thank you both, Katie and Justin. We do have a few questions that were pre-submitted when people registered. If you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat. Nina from the Wetlands is also monitoring the chat for us. The first question is from Christine. How do you keep the plant life balanced and how do you prevent invasive species?
Good question. I think maybe Justin and I can both give a quick response
Yeah.
to this, or yeah, maybe I think we maybe answered this question a little bit in each of our talks. But yeah, we do a lot of invasive species management and we do a lot of seasonal prescribed burning. And every season at the refuge, there is work to be done to treat invasive species and to promote biodiversity. So I think like Justin and I said, we have a lot of different methods for treating invasive species and also keep a regular burn rotation. And that seems to promote balance in the plant community.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, you can't really prevent invasive species. Yeah, once you treat them, they tend to come back. But if you can get the area restored to a good prairie, the prairie will fight back against those invasive species. But they're always going to be there. They're not going to go away. They're very resilient.
Okay. Pam asks, what do you enjoy most about this property?
Well, for me, I get to work at the property every day, so I really enjoy just seeing all the different animals and plants and feeling very connected to it.
Okay, and Lynn in the chat asks, any chance you would have a hike in the winter where you would allow folks to hike on the levee and see eagles up closer?
Yeah, I don't know. We'd have to talk to some people about that.
Okay. Marin asks, how can ordinary citizens help restore wildlife habitat at the refuge?
Definitely come out to our volunteer events. I think they not only do you get to, work for a few hours and get out in nature and appreciate the habitat and all the beautiful flowers and plants that are at the refuge, but it's a great learning opportunity. And you're going to be out there with people like me and Justin who are a little bit more familiar with maybe some of the plants that you don't know or some of the animals. And it's a really fun experience to learn about what we're planting and learn about which plant species like to grow in different types of soil types and habitat. And I think, yeah, I think that's a great way to get more involved and to learn.
Okay, and Peter has asked, are there any known populations of Blanding's turtle at the refuge?
Not that I'm aware
Don't think
of.
so, no.
Okay, and the last question that was pre-submitted is from Jean. What is the best way to handle Canada goldenrod?
Great question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
From my perspective, and I think, this is not a species that we're focusing on too heavily right now, but should definitely be more of a target in the future. I think it's kind of a careful cycle of burning and seeding and mowing. There are critical times during the growing season in early June is one time you can start mowing Canada goldenrod where it's really dense. And especially right when it starts to flower around August, when it's either just starting to grow, you cut it back and then it regrows, which expends a lot of energy. And same thing when it's flowering, you just want the plant to have as much opportunity as possible to actually get rid of its energy stores, and then you cut it back. And I think by mowing and then burning and introducing species through a seed mix, that's one way that you can start controlling Canada goldenrod and promoting diverse plant habitat.
Yeah, it's a very difficult species to treat.
Okay, and I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I would like to thank everyone for attending tonight's event. And please complete the survey that will appear when the Zoom ends. We always appreciate your feedback. And now I will turn it back over to Katie and Justin for closing comments.
Thanks again for having us. It was fun to be here virtually, and I look forward to seeing you all at the Refuge. Come on by, go for a hike, and come out to one of our volunteer events.
Yeah, and I'd like to say the same. I thank for everyone coming here, and if you come out to the refuge and you see some people working out there, come say hi to us, and we'd love to see you at the volunteer events.
Okay, and thank you. And again, thank you for joining us. Good night.